called peacekeepers. But what's their mission when they can't keep the peace? The United Nations, along with the 40 nations that contribute UNIFIL blue helmets to monitor that buffer zone in South Lebanon, condemning the growing standoffs with Israel's invading army that have culminated in a tank ramming the gates of an observation post on Sunday. We'll hear about the fallout and comment on the counterargument. Israeli Defense Forces releasing drone footage purporting to show a Hezbollah position that's literally a stone's throw away from a UNIFIL base. What's the UN's job when Hezbollah fires rockets for 11 plus months out of a zone that's supposed to be the reserve of the Lebanese army? What does the world body do when Israel asks the peacekeepers to get out of the way? There's a broader issue. UN bashing's a pretty safe sport, particularly when a permanent Security Council member like the United States has your back. But what's the alternative? Benjamin Netanyahu may score political points at home for slapping a travel ban on Secretary General Antonio Guterres. But what are the actual consequences? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Israel's standoff with the United Nations. Joining us from London, Aaron Bregman, Senior Teaching Fellow at the Department of War Studies at King's College London. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much.
Franco-Lebanese journalist Lynn Tahini, reporter at the news website EC Beirut. How are you?
Great.
Welcome back as well to John Linden, Executive Director of the grassroots umbrella organization, the Alliance for Middle East Peace. How are you?
I'm okay. Yeah, good to be with you.
Okay. And from Washington, David Makovsky, Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and the host of the podcast Decision Points, which looks at Arab-Israel relations. Great to see you.
Great to be with you.
Your reactions on the hashtag F24debate. Yeah, 3 weeks ago it was exploding pagers. Now it looks like all-out war. There's ground fighting. There's airstrikes. Israel's Air Force this Monday hitting an apartment building far from Hezbollah's strongholds in the northern Lebanese town of Aitu. At least 21 killed in a Christian-majority area. There's speculation over what the target of that attack might have been. Casualties on both sides, with this Monday's funerals of Israeli soldiers killed in a drone attack by Hezbollah on a training base. There were 4 killed over there. John Linden, every day it looks like there's some new limit that's pushed, or is it? I don't know.
Yes, I mean, the escalatory ladder is one of the many cliches that this war has sort of produced and repeated in global media. And we've gone up notch after notch after notch. If you think about where we were, we had the year anniversary of October 7th.
Are we at the 2006 level?
On the Lebanon-Israel axis, no, in my view, not quite, because the scale of that with regards to the depth of Israel's invasion into Lebanon was far greater. But we're in a way, a much more dangerous moment because of the connection with the wider regional escalation, as well as over a year of operations now inside Gaza. I don't think most people in 2006 feared the full outbreak of a wide regional war in the way that we do now at this moment, at least to the same extent. And we have, because it's not one isolated issue, it's many connected together in this kind of spider web. We're also seeing the real limit of the international community trying to approach one on its own to try and find a de-escalatory path. I think what we need to do, if this is a broader lens of a regional escalation, is take a broader approach and realize that what happens in Gaza, what happens in southern Lebanon, what happens in Tehran, these are connected. And we need a holistic, multilateral approach by the United States, by the international community to resolve all of them. But my own view is that the epicenter is what's taking place between Israelis and Palestinians now for over 100 years, and for the last year inside the Gaza Strip. If we can really approach that as being the first fundamental goal, I think we can then find a way to address each of those and deliver the security and stability that everyone in the region now feels very sorely lacking.
But as you say, there's escalation on several fronts. A security cabinet meeting taking place this hour in Israel, billed as a discussion on the response to those strikes 2 weeks ago by Iran on Israel. Lynn Tahini, we were speaking earlier with our Beirut correspondent. He noticed the last 2-3 days there haven't been major Israeli strikes on the capital itself. Do you see that as a sign that for now there is, despite it all, some measure of containment, or is that just a sign that there's worse to come?
There might be worse to come because before yesterday's attack, so yesterday's attack by Hezbollah on Israel, there was this calm episode you're talking about. So the attacks were only on the Bekaa Valley and also in the southern Lebanon. But since yesterday's attack, who were dramatically, there were a lot of casualties in Israel, we felt, especially that Israel had made declaration that they will strike back strongly. And we saw today, for the first time, a strike that took place in a Christian area, which is Zgharta. So we don't know if it's the sign of an upcoming larger escalation. Knowing that, it's for an info, Zgharta is a Christian area, but the leader of the Maronites that are living in the area has done a public declaration saying to people to open their houses to people from the Shia community.
And politically, it's a stronghold of a politician who's close to Hezbollah.
Exactly. He's the one who said you have to open your houses to the internally displaced people. So we don't know if this would, on the long term, create some security issues between people living in this Christian area and people that are displaced and now living in this area.
Aaron Bregman, how do you read the last 48 hours when you see, and as John was saying, there's been strikes in the Gaza Strip as well. It's been happening on several fronts, and there have been air raid sirens in central Israel.
Yes, stopping firing at Beirut is a request which was made by President Biden. He asked Netanyahu to stop firing on Beirut, and Netanyahu got in return American help with the forthcoming Israeli attack on Iran. So
yeah,
this
those
is the
THAAD
connection.
missiles that are due to be delivered.
Yeah, probably to deliver, probably from Jordan or from one of the countries which got them in the Middle East. So it was a give and take between Netanyahu and Biden. Netanyahu, you stop attacking Beirut, and I'll help you. As far as the rest, in Lebanon, there is a massive Israeli force there, 4 divisions still working along the border, on the northern side of the border, but I can see them moving a little bit deeper into Lebanon, and I believe that the future, what we are going to see in the coming days and weeks, is probably the Israelis moving deeper into Lebanon. That's what we are going to witness, I believe.
That's what you were going to witness. We heard from Israel's defense minister on Sunday, and Yoav Gallant making it clear that when it comes to South Lebanon, his country's in it for the long haul. Let's listen.
I
have instructed the IDF at all levels to ensure the destruction of these sites and to ensure that terrorists may not return to these places. This is essential in order to ensure the safety of Israel's northern residents.
So, Aaron Bregman, how long is the long haul?
Well, I think that we are going to talk, weeks, months, and if the Israelis get stuck in Lebanon, as they did in the past, it could take years in South Lebanon. There is going to be a stage where the clearing of the border, what they are doing at the moment, will come to an end. And then they will start pushing deeper into Lebanon, and I believe will create some sort of a buffer zone there. It will be tricky for them. They will have to be careful, the Israelis, not to get stuck again in southern Lebanon. But I reckon that they will start moving gradually in the direction of the Litani River.
David Mikowski, you agree it could be years of Israeli presence in South Lebanon ahead?
No, I respectfully disagree. We just don't know. Here's why. It's really up to the Lebanese people if they are able to restore sovereignty of their country that the Lebanese armed forces can really take hold of the border area. Look, Israel's been in southern Lebanon from 1982 to 2000. They wanted to get the heck out of there. There was no constituency hardly that wanted to stay. They very much wanted to just know that they could bring back 68,000 their residents in the northern border area of Israel, that it's safe for them to come back. So it's really, how does the international system work in a way that the LAF is strong enough to take up control of its own border? The Middle East is a unique place, in my view. It's not the only place, of course, but where the non-state actors like Hezbollah have been stronger than the state. This asymmetry needs to be corrected, or else we're just going to see continued bloodshed for many years. I think Israel wants to get out. They just want to know, to be able to tell the public it's safe to go back.
All right, and that brings us to the matter at hand. You're describing that portion of South Lebanon that's where those UN peacekeepers have been now for decades. EU foreign ministers this Monday reiterating what was stated at a summit of Mediterranean nations late last week in Cyprus, namely denouncing Israel for targeting UNIFIL peacekeepers who number some 11,000. Italy, Spain, and France, major contributors in an operation that's now suffered 5 blue helmets wounded by gunshot. Nicholas Rushworth has more.
UN peacekeepers are, day after day, finding themselves in the crosshairs of Israel's war on Hezbollah. The UN mission in Lebanon, UNIFIL, says Israeli tanks forcibly entered the gates of one of its bases in southern Lebanon and destroyed the main gate early on Sunday. In a statement, the United Nations interim force in Lebanon said, while peacekeepers were in shelters, 2 IDF Merkava tanks destroyed the position's main gate and forcibly entered the position. Peacekeepers at the same position also reported the firing of several rounds nearby which emitted smoke. UNIFIL says, despite putting on protective masks, 15 peacekeepers suffered effects including skin irritation and gastrointestinal reactions after the smoke entered the camp. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is calling on the UN to remove UNIFIL from the border, saying peacekeepers are providing a human shield to Hezbollah.
We regret the injury of UNIFIL soldiers, and we're doing everything in our power to prevent injuries. But the simple and obvious way to ensure this is to simply get them out of the danger zone.
The incident on Sunday took place at the Ramya observation post. UNIFIL says that on Saturday, IDF soldiers stopped a critical UNIFIL logistical movement near Meis el-Jabel, denying it passage. International criticism is growing, with Israeli forces repeatedly firing on peacekeepers. 5 of them have been wounded in recent days. The Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, in a phone call with Netanyahu, stressed the urgent need for a de-escalation of the conflict and said attacks on peacekeepers were unacceptable. Italy contributes 868 military personnel to UNIFIL.
David Mikowski, what should UNIFIL do?
Look, you're pointing to an important point. I mean, I remember the 2006 war, and people thought, no, UNIFIL is going to be bolstered. It's not the same UNIFIL of pre-2006. And yet the pattern sadly reasserted itself, that the Lebanese government did not want UNIFIL to constrain Hezbollah, to take away its weapons as called for. Going back to 1559, Security Council resolution, but 1701, certainly not south of the Litani River. And yet the UNIFIL felt it was totally constrained, that it was not allowed to operate against Hezbollah. The net effect is that it's sadly become rather, ineffective since 2006, certainly before 2006. But our hope was the UN Security Council resolution would make a difference, and it didn't. And unless the public understands that UNIFIL's played virtually no important role there, then you don't see the picture. The picture is sadly that the Lebanese government did not want a political conflict with Hezbollah, and so it basically neutralized UNIFIL's ability to work.
And just to be precise on this, David, just to be precise on this, what is UNIFIL's mandate?
Well, UNIFIL's mandate was, I think, was to implement 1701, the Security Council resolution passed that ended the Lebanese War of 2006 with Israel, 34 days of back and forth. And the idea was that Hezbollah was not supposed to go south of the Litani River, which depends the way the river bends, but let's say roughly 15 kilometers from the border. And that was hopefully going to be the silver bullet that would ensure that Israel wouldn't have to go back in. And it didn't happen. And unless the public realizes the context, then all this sounds like noise. And a sad tragedy, too, because there are people that have lost their lives. And nobody wants a single peacekeeper to lose his life.
A lot of people in Israel, this is what our correspondent's been reporting, John Linden, feeling there's a double standard, that for 11 plus months we didn't hear boo from UNIFIL, and that now suddenly they're taking a stand when it's Israeli troops, not Hezbollah.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, very often I talk about the fact that what's going on in Gaza is invisible inside Israel, which is a frustration and something we need to address. I think also for the international community, there's an invisibility of what's going on with regards to Hezbollah's activities in southern Lebanon and the way they're imperiling residents of northern Israel that people dismiss sometimes. This is very real. There's 60,000 Israelis who've been out of their homes now for over a year. And today in the news in Israel, for example, the top story, a day after a military base was hit by a drone, was actually the uncovering of lots of tunnels that were pointed towards Israel, and people living with the very recent memory of what Hamas did via tunnels like that in northern Israel, knowing that Hezbollah is a much more fearsome opponent than Hamas, that is going to put real fear inside the hearts of Israelis. And people have to really acknowledge that. That's a political reality that would constrain any Israeli leader, even a more sort of pliable one than we have at the moment. There is, though, something David said is worth acknowledging. Hezbollah's strength, historically, is what prevented, shamefully in my view, UNIFIL being able to really implement 1701. Now, it's important to note everybody is in breach of 1701 at this point.
So is it better that those blue helmets are there, or is it better if they weren't there?
It's better if they're there, in my view.
Why?
But it's better if they're there and they're doing things they're not doing today. And just to complete this thought, Hezbollah is in relative terms weaker than it has been for a very long time. There's an ability to potentially to strengthen the sovereign institutions and state inside Lebanon, but its army is not going to be able to fill that vacuum quickly enough. But how about ramping up UNIFIL's presence? More UNIFIL, not less, and actually implement 1701, give clearer instructions to the peacekeepers about their ability to be able to engage Hezbollah. And strangely, you would give Hezbollah a ladder to climb down on, because they will not want to seem as if they're running away from Israeli fire. But if it's the UN coming in and doing it, and that there's some sort of deal fashioned around it, they can save a little bit of face, go north of the Litani, be in compliance with 1701. And it's important to note that Hezbollah has killed peacekeepers. Right? I come from Ireland. There was a very notable instance last year, or 2 years ago, of Private Sean Maloney being killed by Hezbollah. And I think there is some people within UNIFIL that would actually like clearer direction over what they're able to do and fewer political constraints.
So if you're a betting woman, Lynn Tahini, what are the chances, as John Linden was saying, of there being more, not less, UNIFIL peacekeepers right now in South Lebanon?
I totally agree with you, because I need to say that there was breaches from both sides. According to the Lebanese government, you have more than 37,000 violations on the Israeli side of the 1701 since 2006. So you have also, we don't talk enough about the Israeli violations. We talk a lot about Hezbollah's violation. I don't have the numbers, but there are also a lot of violations from Hezbollah's side. So as John was saying, I think you have no choice today. If you really want to improve the situation, you have to increase the numbers of the peacekeepers that are. You have more than 50 countries that are represented at the UNIFIL. But the thing is, there is the impression, I'm talking about the Lebanese side, that they're doing nothing. They are more working socially with the populations, helping them. But effectively, if we're talking about the peace process, it's not a real army. These are civilians, you know. It's not an army that is working effectively. So the impression is they have to have more power, not only in numbers, but also in a power that they could use.
So if they're ineffective, What if they left? What would happen? Wouldn't change anything?
No, as John said, they have to stay because I think if they leave, knowing that Hezbollah is still very strong in the south. So the Hezbollah's militants cover almost 5,000 kilometers of the Lebanese territory and a lot in the south of Lebanon. They have built a lot of tunnels. They are very strong. They are used to live for weeks inside these tunnels. So the presence of UNIFIL today, stops them, if you want. You know, it's things get more difficult for Hezbollah to fight against Israel, even if it's morally and not effectively on the ground, since it's not an army.
There are peacekeeping operations, Aaron Bregman, from the United Nations around the globe. What's the reason? And it seems as though it's not the same mission everywhere. That's why I asked that question earlier to David. What is the mission of UNIFIL?
The mission, you know, I saw them back in 1978 after the Litani campaign. They were deployed there. Two things. Number one, they are a symbol of peace, you know, to keep an eye on what's going on and to monitor the situation. But as you mentioned there, to make sure that 1701 is implemented, the resolutions that ended the 2006 war. Now, at the moment, the main mission, which is to implement 1701 or to monitor implementation of 1701, is not relevant. We are at a time of war. And the reality at the moment is that the Israelis want them out of the way. That's the reality. They're firing at them. They try to scare them. For me, this is an indication that the Israelis prepare the ground for the possibility of moving deeper into Lebanon. They are planning to move into Lebanon, the Israelis, and they don't want UNIFIL keeping an eye on them. But I think that there is also a long-term view here, Israeli view here, which is that in the future they want to see the Lebanese, not UNIFIL, the Lebanese controlling the border with Israel. I believe that when diplomacy starts, the Israelis might well ask not to see UNIFIL at all, but to see only Lebanese forces and Lebanese responsibility
And why is that?
along the border.
Why?
Because if it is UNIFIL and there are problems along the border, the Israelis can only blame the United Nations. It is easier for the Israelis to put the responsibility on the Lebanese government to take control of the border. And therefore, I believe that in future diplomatic negotiations, the Israelis might well decide not to have or not to ask or not to encourage having United Nations forces there.
David Mikowski, you agree?
No, well, yes, I don't agree with the rationale. I agree at just basics, which is that a state should have sovereignty. Look, Jordan is on the Jordanian border, the longest border Israel has with Jordan. It works very well. Doesn't mean there isn't some Iranian weaponry that gets smuggled from Jordan into the West Bank, but that's not because the Jordanians are looking the other way. Excellent security cooperation. Same with Egypt, very quiet border. So Lebanon should have the Lebanese border. And, you know, just on this point about would more UNIFIL peacekeepers make a difference? You know, it would make a difference if the UNIFIL would actually have a mandate of enforcement, as I think was intended by 1701.
Right, but they have something called Article 6. Can you explain what that is, Article 6?
No, I mean, look, my understanding is that the last minute at 1701, the Lebanese and others put in a clause that says that UNIFIL will work at the behest of the government of Lebanon. So basically under, the auspices of that government. If the government doesn't want it to take on Hezbollah, it won't. That's the main point. Will it have teeth to take on Hezbollah or it won't? If it doesn't, I don't think if you had 1 million peacekeepers, will make a darn bit of difference. If it does, then you don't need that. You don't need 1 million, but you might need more, of course. But the core point is not numbers. The core point is the mission. Will it keep to 1701 that Hezbollah shouldn't have weapons south of the Litani? By the way, 1559, the previous Security Council resolution called for the elimination of militias totally and their disarmament. I didn't even mention that. But we're just so far away from this. It comes down to enforcement. All Israel wants to be able to do is tell its 68,000 people, you could come back to your homes. It's safe. There's not going to be an October 7th. The tunnels have been uncovered, etc. That is the core point. Everything else gets into tactics, in my view. The Israeli army doesn't want to be in Lebanon. Believe me, they would love to get the heck out of there, but they just want to know the question that the whole public wants to answer. Is it safe? That's it.
Lynn Taney?
To get back to the Lebanese army, the thing is the Lebanese army is very weak today, and if there's no empowerment from the international community, the Lebanese army won't be able to secure the frontier with Israel. So you need to. I agree. You need to have larger mandate for the UNIFIL for a transitional period, and in this transitional period, you have to empower the Lebanese army. Today, if you don't empower the Lebanese army, it's totally impossible to secure the.
Are the Lebanese right now in an impossible situation because since Michel Aoun left in 2022, you don't have a president because of this sort of collegial way it works. They can't agree on a name. No. And so let's say tomorrow morning a president is named, it's in the midst of all of this. So will that president have any credibility?
I guess that having a president is the step one towards.
But how can they get one that the Lebanese can agree upon?
They have to meet all together and agree, and now is the moment because now Hezbollah is politically weakened. We have to say the truth. Today, Hezbollah is politically weakened, so it's the moment for the Christian community to join hands together and to elect a president that would be a neutral president, strong enough to have the trust of the international community. Because today, Lebanon, it's impossible for the Lebanese state to survive. We are at the edge of a huge humanitarian, sanitarian, and security crisis. This is something that the international community has to admit, and there has to be diplomatic, negotiations in order to support the Lebanese having a president. This is the truth today on this.
And just briefly to remind our viewers, you say a Christian because there's a sort of tacit agreement whereby. Yes. The president is a.
The president is a Christian Maronite. The prime minister is a Muslim Sunni, and the president of the parliament is a Muslim Shia. And for the past 2 years, or even since 2006, we have noticed that Hezbollah has been the most powerful party in the country, politically, militarily, and he was kind of setting the politics of Lebanon, even though the other parties were not agreeing with Hezbollah's politics. And this is part of the problem, because on October 8th, a large part of the community, maybe 70% of the Christians and the Muslim Sunni, were against Hezbollah's support to Hamas in Gaza. They were against this war. And today the problem is, why I'm telling that we're at the edge of a security crisis, it's maybe on the long term with these displaced people, because I have to remind that today we have 1,200,000 internally displaced people in Lebanon. So this would create on the long term, out of 6 million people, this will definitely create on the long term a lot of security problems, internal problems.
Getting back to the role of UNIFIL in all of this, we've seen strong language diplomatically from European powers that have peacekeepers inside of Lebanon. We're waiting for the U.S. elections. We've talked about it on this set, so there's kind of a period of interregnum, if you might say, that's already begun right now in Washington. What can those European nations, the ones that have been speaking out, do?
Quite a bit. I mean, there's a European Council meeting this week. There's a Foreign Affairs Council meeting beforehand. So you have a lot of these same leaders are gathered in Brussels this week. There's more agenda time being devoted towards the crisis in the Middle East than any other issue. I think what you saw in the package with Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister in Italy, was noteworthy because my understanding is that she spoke to Netanyahu in pretty stern terms and his statement came soon afterwards. Now, Meloni is on the right within Europe, is seen as one of the more supportive heads of government with regards to Israel. And if you want to alienate an awful lot of the world in one go, I think taking these steps against UNIFIL is a pretty efficient way to do it, because you have the global south and Europe overrepresented with regards to allocation of troops. And these are the places where Israel's sort of support has been hemorrhaging, particularly over recent months. You mentioned the presidential election as well, which I just want to make sure that we don't kind of allow ourselves to wait the 100 days almost until a new president is inaugurated in order to deal with so many of these issues. Yes, I feel like it's very convenient for some people to do that. And actually, there's a lot of time. Things could get immeasurably worse within those 3.5 months. And they could also get a bit better. And the European states, as you mentioned, maybe have the ability to step up.
All right, but here's the question then. EU foreign ministers, as you say, this Monday, they put out a joint communique. They've been meeting in Brussels. They back UNIFIL. Among those absent, by the way, from this preparatory meeting for Thursday's EU summit, Germany's foreign minister. This after tabloid Bild reported that Annalena Baerbock and Economy Minister Robert Habeck, both from the Green Party, had quietly blocked arms deliveries by the coalition government in Germany for Israel for months, deliveries that have been promised now by the Chancellor in the wake of the Iran missiles that fell on Israel last week. So, again, if you have the biggest economic power in pulling one way and countries like Spain and Italy and France pulling another.
I mean, disunity amongst the 27 member states is nothing new. And on this issue in particular, there's a very, very wide spectrum. But I think everybody in Europe, all 27 member states, want this war to end. They see the huge instability that it's creating globally. There's a mania around migration within Europe and sort of the political consequences people seem to think it will have on elections. And it's important to note that the instability, the displacement that we've been speaking about, that tends to have knock-on effects with regards to migratory paths in Europe. So I think Europe is in one voice about wanting the war to end. What it is in a far more fractured voice on is how and what kind of role could Europe play on this. I mean, Europe is Israel's biggest trading partner. It's the largest donor to the Palestinian Authority. It has historically tried to stake out novel positions on this issue. It was the first international entity that really pushed towards a two-state solution back in the early 1980s. And I would love to see Europe leading on the thought leadership part of this and also with its values. Europe, again, sometimes this is spottily implemented, but we talk about civil society, democracy, these being core European values. I would love to see European leaders speak over the heads of the leaders in Israel, Palestine, and the wider region, most of whom are problematic actors in this context, and speak directly to the citizens in the region. We have 70% right now of Palestinians who want this war to end, want to take a ceasefire and hostage deal. 77% of Israelis in a poll released today that want the same. I'm sure a vast majority of Lebanese people that want the war to end. Speak directly to the ordinary people in the region, empower and scale the work of civil society organizations that can create bottom-up pressure and can produce new leaders, because that is something everybody seems to agree is going to be necessary for the next chapter in the region.
Aaron Brigman sitting in London. You're listening to John Linton. Beautiful thoughts, but is any of that possible?
Not at the moment, I believe. I believe that it is, sadly, time of escalation. We can see that Hezbollah is in many ways back to itself in the last couple of days. They landed terrible blows on Israel, and the escalation will continue between Israel and in Lebanon. We are talking about UNIFIL. Even if UNIFIL stay there, they do not have any significant role at the moment. And even if they stay there, they will stay within their camps and they will probably try to protect themselves. This is time of war now, and what I see is an escalation.
An escalation coming up. The row over UNIFIL, only the latest in the last 12 plus months between Israel and the United Nations. During a UN week last month in New York, the foreign minister announced a travel ban to Israel for Secretary General Antonio Guterres, one that was argued in favor of by Israel's representative to the United Nations.
We are very disappointed from the Secretary General's approach. Let's look at the last year. After October 7th, the Secretary General put a very poor statement where he said that there is no vacuum. And some understood that he's justifying the atrocities of October 7th.
Danny Danon there speaking. David Mikowski, is the Israeli government really took badly that statement, which sitting to many people seems a little innocuous, that what happened in Gaza did not happen in a vacuum. Why did they react so strongly to that statement?
It was a longer statement. There was some back and forth. It came across over in its entirety as trying to explain away October the 7th. It wasn't saying I support October 7th. Of course, the Secretary General didn't say that. But it also comes against the context that the UN is very quick to condemn Israel, but it is virtually never explains, like for the peacekeepers that we've been talking about this whole debate segment about the importance to keep the 1701 to stop Hezbollah from going south of Litani. That we just never hear from the Secretary General. So I certainly don't believe the Secretary General was in favor of October the 7th. But the way the lengthier part of the statement was crafted, it came across as providing some sort of rationale for it, even though, of course, he did not endorse it. I think there's a way for this to be corrected with this current crisis about how he views the role of UNIFIL peacekeepers. Because we all know here, we've all said the same thing. They're not doing their job. Again, I don't blame them as individuals, of course not. But they really have not been able to do what 1701 envisaged, which was to stop Hezbollah from deploying south of the Litani River with its weapons. And that, the Secretary General, we never hear from that publicly, never.
John Linden, could Antonio Guterres have done things differently?
No doubt. I mean, he has a very difficult job, and I think it's pretty much impossible for him to make everybody happy. But I think the way the UN is seen inside Israel is something that the UN and all of us need to reflect upon. It's the most important multilateral institution in the world, and I've never seen polling on it, but I would guess it's one of the least credible in the eyes of Israelis. And that's a real problem, because the UN is going to have a role, no matter what, in a path out of this. And I think the way in which the UN institutions interface, potentially do public diplomacy inside Israel is going to be important. And then also implement resolutions. I mean, we keep coming back to this. Part of the issue is much bigger than Israel-Palestine. It's that we have UN Security Council resolutions that go unimplemented over and over and over again. For us to have nearly 2 decades of 1701 going unimplemented is a huge problem. To have a UN Security Council resolution back in the summer when we finally got one calling for a ceasefire and a hostage deal also going unimplemented. What is the point of...
But is that the UN's fault?
I mean, the
UN is just a forum.
It's a forum, it's an institution, but it's also an aggregator of where we are as an international community, and we're not in good shape. If we want to try to get our arms around these very significant issues right around the world, multilateral cooperation and institutions are going to be critical. And these institutions, which were created out of the last cataclysmic war on this continent, are attenuated, they're coming apart. And what I would love to see is an effort to try and fix them in real time rather than wait for the next catastrophe to fully explode and then us having to build new institutions on its ashes. Let's try and learn something from previous decades, reform these institutions, build more trust and credibility for the people that must depend upon them often in war zones. And I think also, whilst we're being sort of megalomaniacal around this, begin to discuss how people's views are being represented. I mean, people, not just sovereign states within these institutions, so they feel like they connect more to Israelis, Palestinians, Lebanese people, rather than these conversations taking place in New York that seem very abstract.
Aaron Bregman, this brings us back to what you were talking about earlier, which is the reality of what's happening. And the Israeli government's ire has also been directed at the UN relief agency in Gaza. What's the alternative, though?
Well, going back to Gaza now, talking about Gaza, what the Israelis are trying to do, especially in North Gaza, is to empty it of its people. And what we see there is part of this attempt to empty northern Gaza from the people, and stopping food from getting into this area and attacking here and there. So there is a bigger picture there in Gaza. It is not just a tactical attack on the place. Under the radar, while we are busy with Lebanon and busy with Iran, what the Israelis are trying to do in northern Gaza, and I believe that they've already started doing, is executing what is called the general's plan, which is just leaving this area empty. And what we see on the screen is part of it.
And so what is the alternative to having the United Nations, again, right now in charge of things like schools in the Gaza Strip?
It will be very difficult for the United Nations to operate, especially again in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, because the Israelis want to take control over this area for reason that, for example, they don't want Hamas to be able to fire from there in the future, and there are also some crazy ideas of resettling the area. So it will be very difficult for agencies like the United Nations and others to operate, especially in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, the Gaza area and Jabalia, etc.
Because what's true for Gaza is also true for Lebanon and true for viewers watching us from places like Congo and Sudan, and that is that actually it is more than a talk shop, the United Nations. They run things like the World Food Program, the World Health Organization.
And not to forget UNHCR and the work it has been doing in Lebanon and in Gaza, and it has played a very important role. And Israel in Gaza has, the way they are dealing with UNHCR has been very shocking for Arab public opinions, because we mustn't forget the Arab public opinions that are today very mad at Israel's politics. And in Lebanon, even people that are opposed to Hezbollah, if we want to talk about Lebanon, they are also opposed to what Israel is doing right now, like the massive attacks and the escalation that is happening in the country. So it's very important to mention that for Lebanon, for Lebanese people, it's not Hezbollah nor Israel. So it's not. This is the reality on the ground.
So much more to talk about. Alas, we're out of time. Lynn Tahini, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank John Linton, David Mikowski, and Aaron Bregman for both being with us here in the France 24 debate.